Hello, BookTube. We're doing a November Q&A on this channel for 2021, and we're going to launch right into it because there are quite a few questions. Once again, you did not let me down. I don't know where all these great questions come from, but I've glanced over some of them while I was porting them over, and they look great. The porting over deserves a mention of its own, of course. The usual caveat on these Q&As is that I am not reading these from the comments field of the video where I called for them. I ported them over to a document so that I could strip out all the excess stuff, not any questions, but the verbiage that YouTube puts in. So just so I won't be reading it or confused by it. So if in that porting process I dropped your question, don't take it personally. It wasn't intentional. I'm not dodging anything. We'll just get it next time. So we'll start off with David Wiley, who has a barrage of questions. Number one, when will we see a second coming of your Western Canon starter videos? Well, yes, I have been promising that for a while, to do Western Canon sophomore year, that sort of thing, where we go through the great works of the Western Canon and elaborate a little, give more titles. And it's an excellent idea. It was an excellent idea in 2018. It's an excellent idea in 2019. It may be an excellent idea in 2022. Question number two. What are three older pre-1800s works that are tragically undervalued today that we should add to our TBR immediately? Underappreciated, I would say. I mean, I could list a large number of these people, but Tasso, for instance, Ariosto, my beloved Ariosto, or Erasmus himself. These people aren't known today. The general gist of the humanist movement is not known today, and that's a shame. But I wouldn't say add to our TBRs immediately. Anyway, your TBR is yours. I wouldn't tell you to add something immediately to your TBR unless it fit with what you feel like reading. Question number three, who is your favorite of the Romantic poets and why? John Keats is my favorite, and the why is because he's the best. And question number four, apart from Seamus Heaney's translation, what are some of your favorite translations of Beowulf? Well, I have a soft spot for Burton Raffles, even though it takes great liberties with the work. I think it's entirely possible to do that and still have a really good translation. Also, there's a Beowulf scholar, Howell Chickering. You may have come across his translation. It's used in a lot of schools, and it, I believe, is bilingual and quite good, quite enjoyable, despite the fact that it comes straight out of the bowels of academia. You'd think it would be unreadably boring. Several Gecko says, "Hi Steve, I'm looking forward to your end-of-year list. Do you ever find that you're padding your list with lesser books to fill up the bottom of your 10s, or is it fairly easy to find 10 genuinely good books in each category every year?" Usually, quite apart from padding lists, usually the problem is cutting worthy books. Usually it's narrowing things down to 10. I read a lot of books in one year, a huge amount. I read a lot of garbage in that year. But if at the end of the year, what Several Gecko is referring to here, for those of you who might not know, is at the end of every year for 30 years or more, I have been doing a year's best and worst list in the 15 or 16 genres that I read. It's no small amount of reading. It's more reading that I do myself than is done by the entire staffs of entire book sections of major newspapers that also come out with lists at the end of the year. And who knows, if you're parsing things out piecemeal like that, who knows what anybody's missing. As far as I know, I'm not missing anything. And I come out with a list at the end of every year. And if I am making a category and I am feeling like I don't have enough books to fill it, that means I didn't do enough reading in that category for that year. So I don't make the category. Like, for instance, in 2021, there'll be no kids and YA category. There has been in several previous years, but I didn't do enough reading there to fill out a list. I had some nice things, some good things that I'd like to recommend, but they're not going to have a category of their own for that list. Joel Swagman says, since you're a longtime fan of Superman fan, I'm curious about how you felt about while the whole Death of Superman saga was going on. For those of you who don't follow your comics, decades ago, DC Comics decided on a whim, on a beer-infused whim, to kill Superman. They issued the issue where he dies with a black armband and a fake Daily Planet newspaper front page about Superman being dead. It made the national news. It was a speculator bonanza. It was just what DC wanted, and that's what that's what Joel Swagman is referring to here. Were you absolutely horrified, or did you know all along that it was just a gimmick and Superman wouldn't stay dead? What about the story itself? Did you feel the narrative was engaging? Would you have written it differently? Well, in answer to all these questions, I was horrified, but only because of the cynicism of it. Of course, DC Comics was not going to kill Superman. Of course, they weren't going to do that. And so no one, I don't think anyone at the time, except maybe children, believed that it was permanent. What horrified me was the cynicism of it. Because if it worked, I knew that DC would just continue to do it. That they would just continue to do this kind of crappy storytelling. And as for the story itself, good Lord. An alien that grunts and groans, the Hulk, basically, comes to Earth. An alien named Doomsday stalks his way straight to Metropolis. He appears to be acting for no reason whatsoever. Appears to just be reveling in destruction. As lazy a character design and concept as is possible to imagine. Doomsday is briefly confronted by that moment's ridiculous parody of the Justice League. They get their collective tookuses handed to them. And then Doomsday fights Superman. And they fight, and they fight, and they fight, and they fight, and they fight. And finally, they manage to kill each other by punching each other at the same time. Just utterly ridiculous. Just completely ridiculous. And, as I mentioned, self-evidently transparent. You knew from the beginning that not only Superman, but Doomsday would not be dead. And I didn't like anything of it. I didn't think any of it was any good. I wanted to say, I howled all the time. Try telling engaging stories instead of doing stuff like this. And the worst part was it did work. It got DC an enormous marketing bump that has ingrained in them the idea that we must do stuff like this on a regular basis. Let's see here. But you had a whole bunch of other questions, right? Because none of you took my precept seriously about brevity being the soul of wit. I myself actually started reading Superman comics for the first time during this period. The whole affair was getting so much attention from the mainstream media, and I got curious. Well, that's exactly what DC was hoping would happen. As a new reader in the early 90s, the first thing that struck me was all the weird and wonderful supporting characters. I didn't realize until years later that these characters came from Jack Kirby's run on Jimmy Olsen in the 1970s. What do you think of Jack Kirby's work on Jimmy Olsen? What did you think of Dan Jurgens bringing these characters back in the 1990s? I don't like either Jack Kirby on the Superman family of ideas or Dan Jurgens on the Superman family of ideas. I think they're both talentless as writers. Let's see here. Vinay Ayilavarapu says, based on your recommendations, I've been reading V.S. Pritchett's complete essays. His essays are accessible and very engaging. Glad to hear it. My question for you is, when are you going to publish a collected reviews essays book? I'll pre-order a copy when it's available. Well, I might once have... sorry, I'm patting my knee to stop Frida from eating things. That's all. I want you to just sit down, baby girl. I want you to stop eating things that aren't organic. Okay, since I'm going to have to pull them out of you. I've lost track because... okay, I'm completely distracted. Let's just look at the question again here. Based on your recommendation, I've been reading V.S. Pritchett's complete essays. His essays are accessible and very engaging. My question for you is, when are you going... are you going to publish essays or a review of your own? Well, I would once have said that that was going to happen, and that was a great idea. But in 2022, I am going to... That's a fool's errand. It's a mug's game. I want to become a quintillionaire by selling books. And the way to do that is to write a totally self-evident and ridiculous, cult-inducing self-help book, which is what I'll be doing in 2022. I will be producing a self-help book for $5 on Amazon, and you will all have to buy it. Let's see here. Try this again, 434. What kind of a name is that? Hi, Steve. 12K is coming no matter how much you protest. No, the Brave 300 will stand in the way. The Brave 300 will stop this channel from reaching the absurdity of 12K. Number one, you've often talked about your love for the movie versions of Jaws and Jurassic Park, but how do you feel about Steven Spielberg's so-called serious movies like Schindler's List, Lincoln, Munich, etc.? I like them. They're very Spielberg-y. They're very by the numbers, but fortunately his numbers are very entertaining, so he doesn't do any bad movies. And number two, are Paul Doherty's murder mysteries set in ancient Egypt worth reading? Yes, they are. I wonder if they're still in print. I bet they're not, but they're very good, yes. John Marsden says, I like to use fountain pens while writing in my journal. Have you ever been interested in fountain pens or fine writing instruments, or have you ever had a favorite pen? That's his first question. And no, I have always had Dogs. I've always had a rather rambunctious crowd of dogs. Most of the time, a crowd of beagles. You do not have a fountain pen with a well of ink if you have a crowd of beagles. So I never did. And I don't have any favorite or fancy pens at all, no. And he also asked, what is the history of Hyde Cottage, and did you choose its name? No, the name was chosen by my surly houseboy, and I rather liked it. Nick Piccarilli says, what makes writing condescending, and how do you spot it? Oh my. Oh my, there are a million different ways. The main way you spot it is if the writer is self-evidently considers themselves to be a class above you. If their books have the tone of like a camp counselor volunteer work advisor who's, I'm a little bit bored. I've been doing this a long time. Yeah, so you kids, you just listen up. Here's how we're gonna do things. If there's a tone like that, a tone that presumes the superiority of the author over the reader, then that's my number one way. Number two, speaking of condescending, how do you respond to people that are dismissive towards small dogs or say that they're not real dogs? Is this a dig? I used to be almost one of those myself. Of course, I love all my babies. But for years and years and years, I used to make fun of my friend Deb, who had tiny little dogs. She had 10-pound dogs or smaller. And I used to make fun of her for that. For, how small and yippy they are, how nervous and neurotic they are. And then, as fate would have it, I got one of my own. I have a small dog, a 10-pound dog of my own now. And this has allowed me to see all sorts of things that I guess I knew originally, which is that some of them aren't delicate, some of them aren't neurotic. Frida is not delicate. Frida is not neurotic. Frida is not yappy. She only yaps when she's demanding affection from strangers on the street. So now I can't even indulge in the comedy routine. I just have to stay silent on the subject. Helen Utzinger says, I recently read Nelson Algren's Chicago City on the Make and The Man with the Golden Arm and thought they were great. Is there a book you can recommend from the 20th century plus that gives a similar and believable take on a city and its people? Well, I'm not sure how believable Nelson Algren's take is, but I could recommend City on Fire, Garth Risk Halberg, his debut, for which he was given, I think it was $330 billion and the keys to the front door of Fort Knox. I think. Or maybe he was given a couple of Kardashians. It was one of those wildfire, anything you can bid, I can bid better type of things in the publishing world, where he wrote a very big, very promising first novel and was given $2.5 trillion. So it's going to take us a month just for a steady stream of black vans filled with money to get to your bank. Just a solid month of those vans riding bumper to bumper to your bank just to move that much money into your account. but the novel is still very good. It's about 1970s New York. It will give you a very good feel for an era of New York that Garth Risk Halberg did not experience. Let's see here. Foothill Element says, Steve, my wife and I thank you for all the 2021 book recommendations. Oh, that's very nice to hear. You're a wealth of knowledge and much appreciated. I recently read that and then watched The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles. Number one, what do you like or dislike about the book and or the movie? I don't like much about the movie. I don't like much about the book either. If you enjoyed it, that's great. But it would take a long time for me to enumerate why. Number two, have you had any opportunity to spend time in Tangiers? Yes, I have. Is Tangiers Australia or New Zealand? No? Well, then you have the answer to your question. And number three, wouldn't a camel trip through the desert on a camel be exciting? Talking to the wrong person there, bub. I have done that many, many times through many deserts. And camels are horrible. They're just horrible people. I realize they're treated like garbage, but that's no excuse. You treat your mistreater like you visit that on your mistreater, not on everybody. Camels are awful. Just awful creatures. Miracles of adaptive biology, certainly, but I never thought I'd say this, but give me a horse instead any day. Let's see here. Bas van Dyke says, hey, Steve, some movie-related questions for a change. Number one, you have told us that The Lion in Winter is your favorite film, but what is your second favorite film? Well, I could say Beckett, couldn't I? In which Peter O'Toole plays the same character. But I actually don't number them after number one. So it'd be a wide range. Probably the foremost contender for number 2 would be Ferris Bueller's Day Off. uh, Number 2, what are your thoughts on the James Bond novels by Ian Fleming? I've never liked them. And do you have a favorite Bond actor? Yes, that would be Michael Caine as Austin Powers' father in Goldmember. And number 3, as a reader of the New Yorker, what do you think of their movie reviewer Richard Brody? I don't think I'm familiar enough with Richard Brody's work to comment one way or another. No, I don't think I am. Let's just move on here. I keep banging this iPad against the camera. Maybe if I sit back a little, that will help. Chris Bianchi has a barrage of questions. Just a barrage of questions from everybody. Number 1, do you still use your local library, whether it's in person or online? No, I don't, and I feel bad about that. I should. My library, whether it's the very local branch, right down the street from me, or whether it's the Boston Public Library, which I love, or the Boston Athenaeum, which is a private library that I love, no matter what it is, I'm sure that there are lots of uses that I could make of the library. The main one that I have used in my life, going to the library in order to work, I would not do anymore. I don't like leaving Frida, unless I absolutely have to, and there's no reason for me to have to. Since iPads and laptops exist, I have the world's database at my fingers on my fainting couch. I do not need to go anywhere to work. And I don't need the camaraderie. I never really did, especially not when I've got such good company. He's right over on the bed staring at me. But there are lots of other things that a library can do, and I know that. I fell out of the habit, and I haven't ingrained a new habit. Number 2, do you think the quality of writing has gone down in the last 50 years, what with what you have read, or with the curriculum in high school and college classes? Is college less rigorous? Is social media a part of the problem? Social media exaggerates every problem, but colleges are much worse. They're much dumber. And a large part of the reason in the last 4 or 5 years has been the drive on the part of academia to say that all the previous understandings about what made great literature, or what great literature was, or what the examples of great literature are all wrong. And not only that they're all wrong, but that they were all made by white racists. And that anyone who likes them today is a white racist, and that anyone who teaches them is a white racist, and that, by extension, any white people in the class are racist. that kind of weirdly vicious fascist ideology has infiltrated all levels of American academia anyway. And that is bound to cause problems. I said this when it was just barely starting, when it was a few tentative footprints here and there, years and years ago. There was a book called I, Rigoberta Menchú. It was a brief cause of a flash in the pan of controversy a long, long time ago, 40 years ago, when a couple of teachers suggested teaching I, Rigoberta Menchú in a great literature class. I, Rigoberta Menchú is not only not canonical, because in order to be canonical, you have to have that one extra element of time, but it's also a bad book. It's just dumb. It might be that the socio-political subjects that it alludes to are important, but that's not part of a literature course. The literature course, there were people saying I, Rigoberta Menchú should be taught instead of The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I'm no huge fan of Conrad's, but there's no question. Now that has firmly taken root, and now every single precept of academic rigor in terms of teaching literature is under fire or already gone. So if you're a young adult right now, if you're a young parent right now, you have children right now who are between the ages of 3 and 8. By the time those children get to college, they will not only not study the works of William Shakespeare, they'll be told not to study the works of William Shakespeare. And what are you going to get at the other end of the system like that? I have no idea. I have no idea. Let's see here. Before we go on for an hour, let's go on to the next question. Number 3, is the book 7 Pillars of Wisdom better than the movie Lawrence of Arabia? They're both great. Number 4, did you enjoy Pete Donlevy's book, The Ginger Man? Donlevy's never done anything for me at all. None of the books have. I don't know why that is, but it is. The books have also never done anything for me in a particular kind of wavelength, a particular way. You've heard on this channel many, many times before that some books just don't do anything for me. But I hold the door open. I keep thinking about them in the back of my mind, and Dunleavy's not one of those authors. Not at all. I read the books with care and attention, and they did nothing for me. So I like, in that respect, he's a lot like, well, a big name would be Robertson Davies, where it's not, the door is not open. I don't feel like I need to revisit those authors. Of course, that could change, but let's see here. I'm looking at the clock because I want to cut these off at 30-minute intervals here, but we've still got plenty of time. Let's see here. Well, let's move on to Isaiah Armstrong. In your Daily Penguin video on Machiavelli's The Prince, you mentioned that it's a drastically misunderstood work. Yes, people think that it is a call to amorality. What part of The Prince do you think is so misunderstood, and what do you think is the correct way of interpreting it? All right, well, that's a whole video on its own. Machiavelli was positing a hypothetical, and people don't think that. Instead, they view him, subsequent centuries viewed him as the devil on earth. A Machiavel became a noun. And that isn't what he was trying to do in that treatise at all. It's not what he was advocating either. It would take me a long video to do. Thanks for your great videos. I revisit your Daily Penguins all the time. Hearing you talk about the canonical classics is a special treat. Greetings to Frida. Well, it's a special treat to talk about the canonical classics. You're not the only person who has mentioned this. I've heard this for years from people saying, as interesting as it is to listen to you talk about other books, when you talk about the canonical classics that you have revisited a million times, not only is it obvious that you've revisited them a million times, but as one person put it years ago, your eyes twinkle like you were looking at a photo album of old friends. That is exactly the case. So it's nice that that's visible. Let's see here. Anthony Silpa says, have any of your written works ever been reviewed by a professional critic? What would your reaction be to a book reviewer who you admired panned one of your works? Well, I don't have any. Nobody reviews book reviews. And I stand by my book reviews there. I might not be a famous book review name, but no, I stand by my work. It's pretty good. If a famous critic were to go to bat against one of my book reviews, well, I'm on pretty sure ground. I'm pretty sure that not only do I understand the work under review better than they do, but that I'm the one who brought it to their attention. That's almost certainly going to be true. And, well... I won't get too high on my horse here, but if a well-established critic were to attack my prose, I believe the phrase in the 21st century is "bring it on." Show me if your prose is better. but I don't have any published works of fiction, so no one's ever done that. I don't have any published works of any length until next year, when I make a self-help book that you all must buy. Ooh, you must buy it. $5 a piece on Amazon. I'm going to make a squintillion dollars off that book. And no one's going to criticize it because it'll be beyond criticism. How are we doing for time? All right, we're fine. Let's move on to Luke and Jennifer Higgins, who have a barrage of questions theme this time around. Number one, are you planning on watching the Amazon Prime Wheel of Time series? Also, what is your take on the books? Well, I've said this many, many times. I will plan on watching the Wheel of Time, sure, but will I do it? I don't know. Will I do it? Well, I've seen bits and chunks of it because I have a screener for like first 4 or 5 episodes, something like that. I have an electronic screener that I occasionally have dipped into. I really should sit down and watch it, but every time I tell myself that I'm going to do that, I then don't. I then read instead, even if it means rereading The Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World, and The Great Hunt. And as for the books, I like them. I like them. They're drastically overwritten, and I lose a little patience with fans of the Eye of the World series that say that Robert Jordan pays homage to J.R.R. Tolkien, that he relies on Tolkien, that he is clearly inspired by Tolkien. I lose patience with stuff like that. He's just stealing from Tolkien. He's writing his books in Middle-earth and just not calling it that, and barely changing things at all, at least at first. It gets more complicated as it goes along. In fact, to be fair, it's already much more complicated even by The Great Hunt, the second book. So, to be fair, that complaint doesn't last for very long. But even so, the writing is just so... it's just so florid, and it just gets to me after a while. I did enjoy the first book. The first book has 4 or 5 very good scenes and a couple of good characters. But those, as I've written in the past, I wrote a review of the final book in the series, the one written by Brandon Sanderson, A Memory of Light. I had a great time writing that review because it allowed me to just create a 2-quart summary of the whole series. And as I wrote in that review, all the bright lights and great parts of the first book, there are fewer of them in the second book, and then fewer of them in the third book, and then only one in the fourth book, and then only one in the fifth book, and then one in the 7th book, and then maybe half of one in the 10th book. It's the law of diminishing returns. Robert Jordan should have made it a trilogy. Let's see here. Number 2, we know it is difficult with your job, but in your free time, do you practice seasonal reading? What genres would you recommend for fall, winter months? I've never understood seasonal reading. I've been railing against it for the whole of my professional career. I've never understood it. I never understood it even before 2021, which 2021's seasons are not the same as any other year that I've ever been alive, and any other year that meteorologists can tell us has ever happened on the New England littoral, on this part of this landmass, since the Earth cooled from a ball of molten lava 4.5 billion years ago. So this particular season would be trouble anyway. But I never know what that means, what seasonal reading means. So I certainly don't do it. No. And then number 3, Amelia. I was wondering when Amelia was going to make an appearance. Amelia is Thanksgiving focused. She realizes you are not a carnivore, but was wondering what your favorite traditional Thanksgiving side dish is. Dressing and stuffing, pumpkin pie, Aunt Irma's inedible fruitcake, etc. My favorite side dish is mashed potatoes. Will Frida be allowed turkey for the holidays? If we're somewhere where there's turkey, she will. I'm certainly not going to deny her turkey. Thanks, Steve and Frida. All right, well, that's the end of Amelia's question. And of course, as Amelia knows, the key to Thanksgiving is not the food, but giving thanks. Look around you. How much are you grateful for? Think about it. At least this one day, think about how much you're grateful for. Parents love you. Roof over your head. Lots of happiness. Think about that. Instead of just rolling. I know it's the most natural thing in the world for all of us to think about the things that are bothering us at any minute. But this particular week is a time to think about the things that are good, the things you're grateful for. And one of those things is mashed potatoes. On that note, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be right back for part 2.